Yes, I wanted to talk about neural design principles for both for understanding biology and advancing engineering. So I think in this neuromorphic community, I think one of the major bottlenecks towards getting useful neuromorphic devices may not be the hardware actually, but algorithmic understanding, design principles of neural computation essentially. So that's kind of the stuff that we think about. So what's the stuff I'm not going to talk about? So I spent a lot of time in close collaboration with experimental neuroscientists trying to understand how specific neural circuits instantiate specific behaviors. There's a famous phrase in biology that nothing makes sense except in the light of evolution. There's a riff on that for neuroscience that Bill Newsom likes to say, nothing in neuroscience makes sense except in the light of behavior. And so we want to identify interesting behaviors and try to understand them. So we've made lots of strides in terms of understanding how retinas see, how flies detect motion, how grid cells, how rats correct their internal estimate of position based on grid cells, how we can even understand aspects of neural dynamics correctly while only recording from 100 neurons out of circuits containing 10 to the 5th neurons or so. And also how enhancing neural plasticity can either enhance or impair learning. I'll say a little bit about this. But I wanted to spend more time, the other thing we think about is theories of neural network dynamics, searching for general principles. And so today I wanted to talk about that. I'll give you sort of 4 vignettes, sort of 4 advertisements about our work. The first will be on the role of synaptic complexity in learning and memory. And here we're going to elucidate fundamental limits on the memory capacity of synaptic circuits given constraints on the complexity of synapses. The next thing, related sort of to Penty's talk, I think one of the secrets in sort of extracting design principles for neural computation is trying to understand the secrets of properties of high-dimensional objects, high-dimensional spaces, mappings from high-dimensional spaces to other high-dimensional spaces. It's likely that the brain exploits many of these mathematical secrets in order to instantiate the algorithms that and behaviors that it does. And so we're going to actually exploit the geometry of high-dimensional error surfaces to speed up neural network training. And deep learning is also, of course, a very exciting field, but there's very little theory in this field. So we've recently developed a theory of deep learning dynamics, and we can use this theory to develop random initializations that are related sort of to this edge of chaos idea to very rapidly train deep neural circuits. And also in this community, fundamental trade-offs between experimental resources and performance are of extreme interest, right? Speed, energy, and accuracy are some of those quantities that we'd like to understand trade-offs, what governs trade-offs between these quantities, and what are the fundamental limits of achievability in this sort of 3-dimensional space of trade-offs. And we've recently elucidated fundamental limits on the accuracy of communication given constraints on both energy and time. You would think that information theory has sort of solved this, but information theory doesn't deal very well with time, and we have a contribution here. So we'll go through this stuff. Now, if you want to relax, almost everything that I'm going to talk about is published, and I'll flash this slide at the end as well. If you want, you can sort of take a picture of the slide, but you can find all of our work on this website. Just the last part on energy, speed, and accuracy is not yet published. And sometimes I say things on Twitter if you want to follow that. Anyways, so let's talk about memory. This is related to the co-local memory topic. So a memory frontier for complex synapses. So if you ask a neuromorphic engineer or a theoretical neuroscientist or a neural network theorist, what is a synapse from neuron J to neuron I? And they'll say that's easy. It's just Wij. Or they might battle fiercely between Wij or Jij. We like to battle about our notation. But regardless, it's just an analog scalar value denoting, for example, the size of a postsynaptic potential induced by a presynaptic spike. Okay? If you ask an experimental neurobiologist what is a synapse from neuron J to neuron I, they will give you a much more nuanced picture about a plethora of molecular signaling cascades. There's a large number of different molecular players. There's a large number of networks. For example, this is a phosphorylation network of kinases and phosphatases hiding within the postsynaptic density of every single CA3 neuron, measured in Seth Grant's lab at Cambridge. Okay? So when you see this, your eyes kind of glaze over. We don't know what this molecular complexity is good for functionally. Okay? It must be there for a reason because it's conserved across many, many species, across many, many millions of years of evolution. So what's its functional purpose? Okay? And do we need to exploit something like this in our neuromorphic engineering devices to achieve performance? So we can't be driven by experiments alone. We have to have a good theoretical idea as well as to why this is there. And actually that idea also exists. So we're all used to this idea of the Hopfield model having linear capacity for random patterns and maybe exponential capacity for very, very special patterns that Ela talked about. But that is one of the seminal results in theoretical neuroscience, right? This linear capacity of the Hopfield network for random patterns. But it turns out that seminal result is actually on shaky foundations if you put in very simple biologically realistic assumptions about the synapses. So imagine, for example, just a very simple, consider the associations that a very simple perceptron can store. One of the things we have to think about is online learning, so streaming experience. We keep seeing a stream of items and we want to remember them as we go along. So we need an online learning rule as opposed to the original Hopfield storage rule, which was not online. So let's say we're given a set of patterns and we want to just come up with a very simple recognition memory device that says, have we seen it or not? A very simple online learning rule is to allow your weights to decay a little bit and then add in the new pattern or add in the new input-output association that you want to store. So this allows analog weights to decay slightly so you forget the past inputs and you add in the new association to learn a new input. You must have decay, otherwise the weights will grow without bounds, so forgetting and learning are two sides of the same coin. And a natural question is how far back in the past can synapses reliably recall previously stored associations? And the answer is if the time constant of these synapses is order the number of synapses, is order n, then the past order n associations can be recalled. So you're in a happy regime where the number of memories you can store grows with the number of synapses. Okay, however, when you look closely at this solution relies on individual synapses to reliably maintain order n distinguishable analog states. Okay, so the typical degree of connectivity of a single neuron is about 10,000 neurons in the system. 10,000 neurons connect to one neuron typically. And it's unclear that the synaptic voltage, induced by a presynaptic spike, has 10,000 reliable analog states, right? That number is really order 1, and in some experiments it's actually 1 because you see these binary synapses that jump. But regardless, if you put in the biologically relevant scaling, where the number of synaptic strengths a synapse can reliably maintain is order 1, not order the size of the network or the size of the degree of the network, degree of connectivity in the network, then you get a dramatically different answer. So let's look at the very simple case where the synapses are binary. They can either be weak or strong. And if the conditions are such that the synapse should potentiate, then maybe if it's weak, then it will potentiate with some probability q. But if it's already strong, it can't do anything else. And furthermore, if it's weak, then it depotentiates. But if it's already weak, it can't do anything else. If you look at this very simple real model, Stefano Fussi and Daniel Amida a while ago showed that there's this stringent trade-off between learning and forgetting. If you make the synapses very jumpy so that you can rapidly learn anything that comes in, right, then the memory capacity of the system catastrophically grows only logarithmically with the number of synapses. The basic intuition is if you learn quickly, each time you see something, you overwrite your synaptic configuration with what's required to store that thing, thereby rapidly erasing memory of your previous stream of experience. You could try to slow down the synapses and make them sluggish, and then the memory capacity can grow with the square root of the number of synapses. But it sort of violates this intuition that we viscerally store very, very well what we just saw, right? So you can either quickly learn, but you'll quickly forget, or you can be sluggish to learn, and then and only then will you be slow to forget. So this is kind of a stringent trade-off that we don't want to be bound by, and we don't think the brain is bound by it. So basically now we have both theory and experiment essentially demanding that we should expand our theoretical conception of a synapse from that of a simple scalar value to an entire stochastic dynamical system in its own right. However, this yields a very, very large universe of synaptic models to explore and understand. And we need theory to impose some kind of order on this model, both to develop engineering design principles for neuromorphic engineering and to interpret the wealth of molecular biology data that we have on synapses that so far haven't been interpreted from a very theoretical perspective. Okay, so the framework that we're going to exploit is we're going to really think of synapses as arbitrary stochastic dynamical systems. We're going to assume that they have M internal states. These M internal states are stable configurations of molecules in the synapse, but we're not going to assume any particular mapping to molecules yet. So the basic idea is, so it's an arbitrary dynamical system with m internal states. Some internal states correspond to a strong synapse. So this is this is a single synapse. Some of the states are strong, some the red ones. Some of the states are weak, the blue ones. And a candidate potentiation or depression event, i.e. whatever electrical conditions are suitable for causing potentiation or depression, or strengthening or weakening, induces a particular transition matrix. So for example, for potentiation, there will be an arbitrary m by m stochastic transition matrix, a Markov transition matrix for potentiation, and a different one for depression. And actually in some prescient work by Montgomery and Madison, they tried to summarize electrophysiology data on synapses through this kind of stochastic finite state machine type diagram. It's unclear whether the stochastic transition diagram is the same across synapses within a brain region, across brain regions, and so on. Likely, they're probably quite different. So the basic idea is we'd like to understand the landscape of all possible models. Okay. So what's the measure of memory capacity? We imagine a simple scenario where we have a continuous online stream of experience. We have a population of n synapses, each with their m internal states. We're going to track the memory stored at a special time, which we'll just call time t equals 0. That memory demands that some synapses potentiate while others depress, yielding an ideal synaptic weight vector, W ideal, across the population. We're going to imagine that the storage of future memories are just random other ideal patterns for those memories, and they cause the change in the weight vector over time. And an upper bound in the memory quality of retrieval of any memory using neural activity is something is given by the signal-to-noise ratio curve, which is just the dot product of the synaptic weight configuration across the population of synapses, with the ideal pattern corresponding to the memory at time 0, appropriately z-scored. So this is a memory curve that starts high and ends low, and it ends, as t goes to infinity, this memory curve will go to 0. Okay, and this is a formalism that's been used by Stefano Fussi, Larry Abbott, Barrett, and Van Rossum, and so on. We're just following that formalism. And in all previous work that has looked at this problem have looked at one model or two models at a time, right? So this is one model, so these are the strong weights, these are the weak weights, these are the strong weights, potentiation moves you this way, depression moves you this way, and this is the memory curve for that model, this is a different model, this is the memory curve for that model. And we can't understand this field by looking at one model at a time. To really elucidate the functional contribution of molecular complexity to memory, we want to not simply understand individual models, but understand the space of all possible models within this family and understand the design principles involved. So the types of questions we're going to be asking is, this is a classical problem in structure function in biology, but suitably formalized, right? So the question is, how does the structure of a synaptic dynamical system as specified by this pair of Markov transition matrices determine its function or its memory curve, right? What are the fundamental limits achievable over all possible choices of such synaptic dynamical systems? What is the structural organization of synaptical dynamical systems that achieve these limits? And most importantly, what theoretical principles can control the combinatorial explosion in the number of possible models as the number of internal states increases? So these are the questions we'd like to ask, and these are the questions we have answered. So in this short talk, I won't go through the details of how we derive it, but I'll tell you the result. The basic idea is we formulate the problem of memory as a problem in first passage time theory. And this leads to a very nice way to, for example, order the states of a system. So using results from first passage time theory, we can impose an order on the set of synapses, on the set of internal synaptic states. So you have to take my word for it that this chain is identical to this chain and this chain is identical to this chain. And then let me just tell you the final result. So what we find is a finite time upper limit on the memory curve of any model. And we call this a memory frontier, right? So this is the signal-to-noise ratio by time plane. Any individual model has a memory curve sitting somewhere in this plane. What we find is a memory frontier beyond whose bourne the memory curve of no model can ever really cross, okay? And this is the memory frontier, okay? Individual models can touch the frontier at one point, but they do horribly at other points, okay? So to optimize memory at any one time scale, you necessarily take a hit at other time scales. The models that touch the memory frontier at one time scale turn out to be simple chains. So essentially, this is the model that is optimal for any one time scale. And you can tune the time scale at which it's optimal by tuning these transition rates, and we have formulas for the optimal transition rates. So that's the nature of the optimal structure. And it turns out that various measures of memory, the area under the memory curve, the prefactor of this frontier, the lifetime of a memory, they actually grow linearly with the number of internal states in the synapse, but only grow as the square root of the number of synapses. So essentially what it's saying is it's much more powerful to have a small number of complex synapses than a large number of simple synapses. And you can design things, trade off M and N to get linear capacity in the number of synapses, which for dense patterns you can never really do better than that. Okay, so the details can be found in this paper. We're happy to say that it actually won an outstanding paper award at NIPS, a couple of years ago. Okay, so that's sort of vignette number 1. Right? So this suggests that we really should think about synapses. If we're going to have them be binary in our neuromorphic engineering devices, we should have internal structure and history-dependent transitions in these synapses. So basically, the dividends of understanding synaptic complexity are threefold. On the mathematical side, we actually derive new theorems about perturbations to stochastic processes in terms of first passage time theory, which I completely glossed over but are in the paper. In terms of neurobiology, it actually gives us a framework for interpreting molecular neurobiology data, which I won't talk about, but I'll briefly mention. And in terms of technology, potentially the next generation of artificial neural networks will place lots of sophisticated signal processing capabilities in the synapses. And there are other clues for this. For example, various solutions to spatial temporal credit assignment problems rely on having internal synaptic states. And recent results from Ricardo Zecchina and colleagues on learning as message passing also show that, for example, in learning the binary perceptron, it's useful to have hidden states inside the synapses of the binary perceptron. I'm going to skip what I was going to say about the connection to neurobiology here, but we have a nice connection that tells us when you enhance synaptic plasticity through various molecular and pharmacological perturbations, when will you get enhanced learning versus impaired learning? And we find that it depends on the history of the previous learning experiences of the rat. So this is a collaboration between 3 labs at Stanford that involves genetic knockouts, optogenetics theory. It's a very fun collaboration. Okay, so let's move to the next sort of idea. Okay, so this is now exploiting an understanding of the mathematics of high-dimensional spaces. Okay, to speed up neural network training. So what's the idea? So it's often thought that convex optimization is easy because there are no local minima. Every local minimum is the global minimum. And it's often thought that for non-convex optimization, local minima at high error stand as a major impediment to non-convex optimization. And the idea behind that is if you just draw a typical random landscape, say in 2 dimensions, this is a cartoon of a protein folding landscape over 2 dimensions, a typical random landscape that you draw in low dimensions does have many, many local minima, which might impede the protein folding, the protein to achieve its native state. Right? But we know that our geometric intuition derived from living and moving within a very low-dimensional world is woefully inadequate for thinking about the geometry of high-dimensional spaces. And it turns out that in random non-convex error surfaces over high-dimensional spaces, local minima at high error are exponentially rare in the dimensionality. Okay? Instead, saddle points proliferate. And we developed an algorithm that rapidly escapes saddle points. And this was a collaboration with Yoshua Bengio's lab. So Yoshua invited me to come to Montreal. I told them about these ideas, and they said, we can test these ideas. So what were the ideas? So it turns out statistical physicists, back in 2007, and in subsequent work, looked at the geometry of high-dimensional random landscapes. So what they did was they considered a random Gaussian error landscape over n variables, and they asked, what's the geometry of its critical points? Now, let me just tell you the intuition first of all. If you have an error landscape over 1,000, over 1,000,000 variables, what are the chances that when the slope vanishes, it's a local minimum? Well, for it to be a local minimum, the function has to curve up in all 1,000 or all 1,000,000 dimensions. If it's a random, typical, generic landscape, the chances that it curves up in all n dimensions is exponentially small in n, unless you're already near the bottom, so there's nowhere really to go down, right? Or unless you're already near the top, in which case most directions curve down, actually. So essentially, at intermediate levels of error, you're going to get saddle points, not local minima. And So what you can do to make this idea or intuition more concrete and then experimentally testable is you can plot each critical point, a point where the gradient vanishes, in a two-dimensional feature space. The horizontal axis is its error level, and the vertical axis is the fraction of negative eigenvalues of the Hessian, the fraction of negative curvature directions, okay? And you might think that all the critical points might live anywhere in this two-dimensional feature space, but it turns out they actually don't. Because of various concentration of measure properties, they concentrate on a monotonically increasing curve. Here is where the global minimum stands. It's the lowest error, and it has 0 negative eigenvalues, so it's down here. Here's the global maximum. It has the highest error, and it has all its eigenvalues of the Hessian are negative because it's the global maximum. And then, basically what happens is critical points at higher error develop more and more negative curvature directions, okay? The chances of a critical point being an order 1 distance away from this is exponentially small in the dimensionality of the system. Okay, so then you could mumble some things about universality. We're used to, in physics, thinking that or knowing that there are certain questions whose answers don't depend on the details. They only depend on the dimensionality and symmetry properties of the system. So we might say, well, we expect this to be true for neural networks because neural networks are also high-dimensional error landscapes. A computer scientist will have a visceral gut reaction to this and say, no, random landscapes are random. They're not special at all. The things that we're doing are very special. We're doing complicated neural network training. There's synaptic weights, there's structure. It's far from random. Okay? So who wins, the physicist or the computer scientist? Let me tell you that the physicist won. Now, Yoshua Bengio is a very enlightened computer scientist, so we had a lot of fun. You know, he said, we can test this idea, so he put his army of excellent graduate students and postdocs, and we essentially tested this idea. Now, intriguingly, this idea was never tested in physics because it's extremely hard to hold a random landscape in memory. You need a memory that's exponentially large in the dimensionality. But for neural networks, you can do that. And what they did was they plotted exactly, so it turns out you can use Newton's method to find the critical points. And they plotted the critical points in the same two-dimensional feature landscape, and feature space, and they found exactly this monotonically increasing curve, both for feed-forward networks on MNIST and on CFAR10, another image categorization task. And so this idea is qualitatively consistent with the statistical physics theory of random landscapes. So then the question is, can we do anything about this? Can we exploit this knowledge now that it might really be saddle points that are the problem, not local minima at high error? And so the basic idea is, and I won't have a chance to really go into detail on this, but again, it's all in the paper. The basic idea is Newton's method gets attracted to the saddle points because it goes down the gradient, and then you're dividing by the Hessian. But if the Hessian has negative curvature, you're turning yourself around and then going up the gradient. So a very simple idea is to divide by the absolute value of the Hessian, which is just the Hessian with all its eigenvalues replaced by their absolute value, its eigenvectors unchanged. And so this basically repels the learning dynamics from saddle points. And there's other ways to derive this that make sense even if you're far away from saddle points in terms of trust region methods. And so does it work? So basically what we did was for a deep autoencoder problem and for a recurrent neural network problem, we just trained using stochastic gradient descent, and we found a plateau in the learning dynamics. So this is a training time and error, and there's a plateau. So once you hit a plateau, you think you're in a local minimum, but it actually turned out that this was an illusory local minimum. It was actually a plateau surrounding a saddle. And when you switch to this new learning algorithm, you see a sudden drop in the error, okay? So basically what this did was it found a negative curvature direction around a saddle and got repelled down that direction to decrease the error. So that's sort of the second vignette. The next two are not as long, so we'll be fine. So the theory, they could be a lot longer, but in any case, I'll try to keep it short. So now, what about the theory of deep learning dynamics? Okay, so can we say anything about that? So this is joint work with Andrew Sachs and Jay McClelland at Stanford. Andrew's a really great graduate student that I advised along with Jay and Andrew Ng, and now he's a Swartz Fellow at Harvard. So what would we like from a theory of deep learning dynamics? Well, we'd like to understand, how does training time scale with depth? How should we set our learning rates to scale with depth? How do different weight initializations impact learning speed? And we did a lot of theory, but I'll just tell you the upshot. What we find is that weight initializations with critical dynamics, which I'll explain in a bit, can aid deep learning and generalization. So what is thought to be another impediment for making deep learning hard? It's the credit assignment problem or the vanishing, exploding, vanishing or exploding gradient problem. So basically, in order to figure out how to change synapses or the activity of neurons down here to correct the activity in the output, you need to know what happens if you wiggle this neuron, how will this neuron respond? And then how do you use that to change the error? Well, you can backpropagate the susceptibility down the chain. That's backpropagation. So what happens is backpropagation is fundamentally a linear approximation. It's a product of Jacobians or susceptibilities between neural activity at one layer and the next. And if the weights are large, this product could explode, and if the weights are small, this product can decay. Okay. So the question is, can we understand this a bit more quantitatively? And it's very difficult to actually understand the dynamics of learning in these nonlinear networks. So what we did was we tried to look theoretically at the dynamics of learning in deep linear networks. Now, lest you think that we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because of course the composition of linear functions is still linear, so that deep linear networks do not have any more expressive capacity than deep shallow networks. It turns out that learning dynamics depends critically on depth, and the learning dynamics is highly nonlinear, because the error function still involves a product over weights, okay? And I'm going to make a long story short and skip these slides, but we analyze these learning dynamics. You get these nonlinear ordinary differential equations that are typically difficult to solve. We found exact solutions to these equations. It turns out, for example, a simple network like this with one hidden layer is successively building up the singular value decomposition of the input-output covariance matrix of our data. So it gives us insight into how the statistical structure of a data set in a time-dependent manner is embedded into the weights of the neural network. But that's not, and we use that to model infant cognition, but I don't want to talk about that. One I wanted to focus on was a striking prediction of this theory, okay? The prediction of this theory is that if you can randomly initialize the weights in a certain way, where you pick these weights to be random orthogonal matrices. So you pick these W's to be random orthogonal matrices, or if it's rectangular, random matrices, all of whose singular values are exactly 1. Then you can circumvent the vanishing, exploding, and you can circumvent the vanishing or exploding gradient problem. And we can actually prove that you will get learning times that are independent of depth. At least learning times measured in the number of gradient evaluations, right? Of course, in a deep network, the evaluation of any one gradient must grow with depth. But you might think that there's an even more adverse scaling to learning time where the number of gradient evaluations have to grow with depth. And we show that that need not be the case with our random initializations. Okay, other people tried other random initializations where they chose these to be random Gaussian matrices so that a backpropagation vector's norm would typically be preserved. But we show that that actually doesn't enjoy depth-independent training times. So, this was a striking prediction that we actually didn't believe, but we believed our math, so we became computer scientists who don't believe equations and have to simulate it to believe it. We sank that low. I'm kidding. Anyways, but so we did the simulation, okay, and this is what we found. So this initialization using random Gaussian weights properly scaled so that you don't get vanishing or exploding gradients does, according to intuition, have depth-dependent training times. So this is the number of training epochs to reach a certain error threshold, and this grows with depth on the MNIST problem. If you switch to a random orthogonal initialization, you get our predicted depth-independent training times. So for depths that are 5, 6, 7, or 8, there isn't much of a difference, which is why they could get away with these random Gaussian scalings. But as the depth gets much, much larger, there will be a huge dramatic difference between this, and essentially also for recurrent networks that are essentially infinite depth, it's also very useful. Okay, we verified that, and we actually understand theoretically sort of why this is happening based on random matrix theory and products of random matrices. You can see the details in the paper. But basically what happens is these random orthogonal matrices allow information about errors to isometrically propagate through the network. It doesn't only preserve the norm of any one error vector, it preserves angles between error vectors. That's the critical idea. Okay, and it also works in nonlinear networks as well. So even if you have the nonlinearity, what happens is this dynamical isometry property holds, And we can get much better performance and speed in training nonlinear deep networks, even though the theory was derived for linear deep networks. And we have some hand-waving arguments why the theory of nonlinear learning dynamics in linear networks is robust to the incorporation of a nonlinearity in the neural dynamics, right? So basically, this dynamic isometry kind of, out of all possible other initializations does the best in 30-layer nonlinear networks. I could mumble some things about criticality in the brain and the connection to this, but I'm not sure how seriously to take the field of criticality in the brain. But anyways, that's there. Okay, so just to summarize this part, another major impediment to deep learning is the faithful propagation of error signals across many layers. Previous attempts to combat this problem by choosing good weight initializations had learning time and number of corrective steps grow linearly with depth. Our new random initialization enables learning time to remain order 1 as the depth goes to infinity, even in nonlinear deep nets. And these weight initializations correspond to dynamical critical networks that are sort of just beyond the edge of chaos, all right? Or at the edge of chaos. Okay, so then I just have I need 2 more minutes for the last part. So I think I'm like almost done. So simultaneously considering energy, speed, and accuracy in computational design. So particularly in communication. So this is joint work again with Shubhanil Lahiri, who also did the work on the memory frontier for complex synapses. He's an excellent postdoc who'll probably be on the job market next year. I would really suggest you hire him. In any case, okay, so why hasn't information theory solved this problem, right? So information theory places limits on the accuracy of communication given, for example, energy constraints, for example, the cost capacity curve, but not time constraints, right? So what it does is gives you bounds on bit rates in terms of energy constrained channel capacity, but achieving such bounds potentially requires long block lengths. You take your messages, you code them into long blocks, and you send the blocks through the channel. Biology doesn't have the luxury of waiting, right? It has to send information right now. It can't block information, otherwise you could get eaten before your brain knows what's going on. There's also the thermodynamics of computation that shows that accurate computations at zero energy cost are possible, actually, but it requires finite time, right? And the basic idea behind the old field of reversible computing is that they isolated the energy cost of computation in erasing bits. Basically, if you erase the information in a computer, you compress the physical states of the computer, you reduce the entropy of the computer. By the second law of thermodynamics, you dump entropy into the outside world, which means you dump heat into the outside world, which means you dissipate energy. So you can try to avoid this by making the computational reversible, but then without a thermodynamic driving force to move the computation forward, it requires infinite time. So time is very, very hard to incorporate along with speed, with accuracy and energy. Okay, so what we've done is we've proved a theorem, a very simple theorem that's easy to state and a little bit more difficult to prove, but easy to state, so I'll just state it. So basically what we assume is, let's assume that we have an arbitrary signaling substrate that is some Markov chain, okay? We have an external signal that's coupled to this Markov chain by modulating the rates. This is typically what happens in any chemical kinetic scheme that systems biologists, for example, write down. Then we have an arbitrary unbiased signal estimator that looks at the state of the Markov chain and tries to estimate the signal, okay? The speed that we're referring to, okay, so there's going to be some time scale, the fastest time scale in the stochastic dynamical system, tau. That sets the units of time. The speed which we're referring to is the amount by which the external signal changes over the time scale of the intrinsic dynamical system. So this is speed. Energy is the amount of power. So we're assuming that this Markov chain is sort of coupled to a heat bath. It's a physically realizable Markov chain. So we can define power dissipation. So this is the amount of power dissipated in the fastest time scale of the system divided by the units of thermal energy. So this is a dimensionless measure of energy. And accuracy is just the inverse variance of this estimator. We can show that the product of speed and accuracy is less than energy. It's a very simple theorem. So if you want greater accuracy for a fixed speed, you better spend more energy. If you want to maintain a given accuracy for a faster changing world, you better spend more energy. This bound is tight for systems that have a single time scale, so it's not a loose bound at all. And the basic idea is that we make a connection between energy dissipation, as quantified by a thermodynamic friction tensor on the manifold of Boltzmann distributions associated with stable states of this family of Markov chains. We make a connection between that and Fisher information. So we essentially show that Fisher information lower bounds, friction, and then everything falls out from that. And we get this, through the Kramer-Rao bound, we get this. So this opens up a framework for thinking about what are the fundamental limits of communication under these three quantities simultaneously, and how close does biology come to these limits. So we're very excited about this. Okay, so again, you can read about everything on our webpage here, except for the speed, accuracy, energy. We have a manuscript that will probably be done in a week or so, a week or two. It's almost written up. And yeah, thanks.
We have time for a question. If our next speaker could come up to the podium.
Yeah, Chris.
Hi, Surya. So with regards to the F over E plane and how different data sets may give rise to different curves in that plane. So for example, the curve for the MNIST data set seemed to have a very different shape than that for the CFAR data set. The question that I already have is that do you have a good theoretical understanding as for why
Sorry,
that's
Chris,
the case?
I'm actually having a really hard time hearing you for some reason. So I don't know what your question is at the moment.
I see.
Do you want to state it just like in a sentence or two?
I'll try to. Yeah. So do you have a sense about what in a given data set will give rise to different curves in the F over E plane?
So this is for the dynamics of deep learning part?
No, for the saddle point.
For the
structure of the error services in high-dimensional spaces.
Yeah. So I think that monotonically increasing curve is fairly universal, because the essential intuition is just in a high-dimensional space, it's extremely hard to get all directions to curve up unless you're already near the bottom.
So I get that point. My question was a little bit more detail. So if you look at the MNIST versus the CFAR curves, although they are monotonic, they still look, to my eye, qualitatively different. So I guess I'm asking, do you have any intuition?
Yeah, so a finer resolution version of that, it's very difficult to get that. We don't have a finer resolution statement than that.
Okay, thank you.
Hopefully there's time, but I very much enjoyed that. So I just had a question also about the second part. So it seems to me that addresses optimization in general with high-dimensional spaces, not just anything about neural networks. Is that true? Is that the way you see it?
Yeah, that's the way I see it. It's a very general statement about high-dimensional non-convex optimization.
And do you think that, have you analyzed sort of the dimensionality you need for that approach to be optimal?
Yeah, so in the numerical network simulations, we had order of 1,000 synapses, so 1,000-dimensional space. And by then, it was already working pretty well. We actually observed the predicted reduction in performance, relative performance of the method if you lower the dimensionality. So this is one of those intriguing algorithms that works better for larger networks than it does for smaller networks, as predicted by theory.
Thank you.